First off, an introduction of who we are, PMP Specialists. We are a small organization which does two main things. Step right in that light. We do Microsoft Project and Project Server. We're a silver partner with Microsoft. We are with the program and project management, portfolio management competency. And the other thing we do is project management with PMI Group, and that's kind of what this is. That's kind of our two areas, the tool side with Microsoft Project and the PMI, PMBOK stuff. And we're also doing in April, we're going to be doing a webinar on OPM, same thing, Organizational Project Management, and Project Management Quality, showing how the two relate within an organization. So I'm going to introduce Tim. He's going to be the speaker at first. So he has over 20 years of experience in project management, and you can see some of his expertise areas: project management, enterprise project management, ERP, enterprise resource planning, MRP, manufacturing and resource planning. He's in some other initials there, and he's got a bunch of certifications there. He'll be the first to tell you he has 3 more letters in his certification than I have in mine. So there is some competition there. I will catch up someday. But right now he's got 3 more letters than I do. So, we're trying for the whole alphabet. And now I'll hand off to Tim.
So I'll introduce Colin Quiring. Colin's been a great friend. We've worked together for several years. Colin has a lot of expertise in project management and especially the Project Server platform. And yeah, he's 3 letters behind me, but he's closing fast, I think. So it's kind of fun. We have a little duel out there. Just keep ourselves educationally in tune is a good thing to do. And he's also written a book, Mastering Resource Management Using Project Server and Microsoft Project 2010. Let's dive in here. So goals for this presentation today is, number 1 is we're going to introduce the concept of OPM3. We're going to share the reason for OPM3, and we're going to give some evidence as to the enablement of the best practices that are found in OPM3 via Microsoft Project Server and Project Professional. Now, if anybody's in here and didn't mean to be in here, this might be the wrong session. You won't offend us if you go out, but this is about OPM3. Quick question. Any PMPs in here? Hooray, there's our brethren. Good job. Who here has never heard of OPM3? Everybody? Good. Yeah. Okay, and to Colin's point earlier, we're going to move through, but we will be doing a kind of a deep dive into OPM3, so you get a kind of a picture of what it's about. So, how did this presentation come about today? Well, as we work with different folks around the country and we engage with different organizations, we recognized a few things, and one is that technology alone doesn't succeed. We also recognize that business process alone doesn't succeed. And we really see where people succeed in having to use both. And so hence the reason why we came to wanting to do this presentation, because we wanted to talk about the business side of project management and how it kind of dovetails in with using the platform of Microsoft Project as an enabler. And so we're going to discuss some of those things. But OPM3 helps us really get a good comprehensive understanding of our organization and how it's functioning, how well it's doing, the health of it. And we've seen organizations where they'll come in and turn on technology, but they really don't have the business background to understand it, and things maybe don't go the way they wanted. The other side of that, I've seen people in one instance was where in the world of academia they love to talk about the business process and write out a process model, but they really never got to the point of enabling that process in a place where people could actually use it or do something with it. And so that's where we came about wanting to do this presentation, because we wanted to talk about it, that it really takes both, and it's a good way to understand your organization is the OPM3 model, and a good way to enable it is Project Server. So, with that, we're going to go into an introduction of OPM3. We kind of break this into two parts. The first part is going to be a lot of OPM3 elements. We're going to kind of dissect that and give you a little bit of a deep dive into OPM3. Okay? And then the second half, Colin is going to kind of show you, based on these constructs and best practices in OPM3, you'll get to see a little bit of, well, Project Server really kind of enables these functions. So let's keep going here. This will kind of go down deep, and then we'll kind of come back out. So, to introduce OPM3, it's the Organizational Project Management Maturity Model. Everybody knew that the 3 was for the M's, right? Got that? Talked to a lot of folks, and you talk about OPM3, and they go, boy, they don't know where it's going. So, that said, it provides a way for organizations to measure themselves and to get better, but against best practices in the project, program, and portfolio areas. So it really focuses on those 3 things. So I'm going to keep going with this introduction. What is the benefit of doing OPM3? Why would we do one? Well, really, this discussion is about maturity. How good is my organization? How would I know? Maybe I've come in and I'm doing some things in Project Server, or I'm doing some things in project management, but is it comprehensive? Is it really manifested itself in the organization? And I just want to understand how well I'm really doing. Okay? And then an OPM3 assessment will lead you to, here's what I'm doing well, here's what I'm not doing so well, and helps you with a roadmap to those things which will bring value to the organization to go improve. So that's really good. It's really based around a continuous improvement cycle for folks. So how is it sanctioned? If you guys are all PMPs, you're pretty familiar with PMI, but obviously it's developed and sanctioned by the Project Management Institute. Some good, smart folks, practitioners, got together and came up with the constructs of the best practices. They have evolved over the last few years, and there's a latest edition that just came out recently for the best practices. But it's a way of assessing the organization as a whole, benchmarking, and improving the organization. That's really what OPM3 is. And just to note, really, it can only be administered by a PMI OPM3 certified practitioner. There's an intense discipline around getting the certification and the tools that PMI has for practitioners to use to do the assessment. Yeah. Is anyone here OPM3 certified? Oh, good. There we go. So, OPM3, per the Project Management Institute, it really revolves around a definition that says, we're going to look at the integration of people, process, and knowledge, right? And really, as a means to achieve a better performance and results and a sustainable competitive advantage for your company. So organizations start looking at their performance and benchmarking their best practices, and they're able to improve. Where does OPM3 apply? So if you were to look at an organization and the normal flow of business, every organization's got their mission, their vision, their values, their goals and objectives. And oftentimes, those things are fulfilled by the projects we do, the work we do. And in doing that work, we end up with business results. The reality of the work we did, maybe it's for a customer, maybe it's a project, maybe it's something we make. But the means by which we get there in the project world is typically done through these 3 domains: project, portfolio, and program management. And so OPM3 is going to address the means by which we get things done from a project management perspective. It's going to talk about best practices and techniques. And it's going to ask those questions in an organization to help us understand how we're doing. So, we're going to start in with the constructs of OPM3. And again, they're based on the domains. So, as a project manager or PMPs, you're very familiar with these three domains: project management, program management, and portfolio management. But here's where we start to take this apart, and we start to talk about the fact that within those domains, there are what's called best practices that PMI has gone out and defined. And when they defined them, they came up with a list of 500 and, I don't think my pointer's working, but 579 best practices. Now, if you take these 579 best practices and you start to break that down, there's really two categories or two buckets of best practices. They break them into what's called an SMCI category and then organizational enablers. And there's 501 of the SMCIs and there's 78 of the organizational enablers. Now you have to hang with me here because we'll just keep working on this theme of breaking this apart. It's important, I think, to understand what's really under the hood of OPM3 because it will relate back later to things we talk about when Colin talks about how Project Server kind of plays into this. But those best practices that we would evaluate in an OPM3 assessment are broken out into how standardized am I in my project management methodologies? Am I able to measure myself? Am I in control and can I improve? And there are best practices related to those understandings. Okay? The other thing it's going to do is it's going to deep dive even below the best practices, and there are what's called capabilities or capability questions that go along with these best practices. So when we assess an organization, there's questions. There's usually 3 to 4 questions that validate that a best practice actually exists in your organization. Okay? So, 3 to 4 questions. There's 1,476 possible questions that could be asked. Doesn't mean you're going to do a whole assessment or on all domains or that kind of thing, but some organizations may do the whole enchilada, but some folks might just do project management and just ask questions around that. So, the same happens here for organizational enablers. There are 78 organizational enablers, best practices. And those are structural, cultural, technological, maybe human resource related practices that we can use or do that really supports project management as a methodology in our companies. Okay? You might think of that in terms of maybe I have a career path for project managers. It's kind of a soft side best practice. I call it soft side whatever. But it's a means by which organizational enablers help the implicit disciplines of project management. Technologically, a project management system is an organizational enabler. It's technology that helps you do project management. So we recognize right off that these best practices, these organizational enablers, they actually break them down into 18 categories over here. So I kind of deep dived on just the organizational enabler best practices. When you get into those, one of the things I found interesting is that OPM3 has a category called knowledge management and PMIS. So from one perspective, having a project management information system is sort of an expectation. I mean, if you're out there doing project management, it's much more efficient and effective, and it's commonly known as a best practice. Okay? And you know, doing an OPM3 assessment, folks are going to look at the artifacts and objects in your organization, and where are those things going to come from? They're going to come from a project management information system or other ancillary systems that support project management. So it's just a given right off the back that we would be in a platform to do our business and to do good project management. So, to break this out in another picture, because I like pictures, it helps me digest the content. But we talked about the 3 domains. Down at the bottom, you have project management, program management, and portfolio management. There's best practices, and we call them BPs, within each domain, and they're kind of broken out into these buckets. So in project management, I would have organizational enabler best practices, OEs, in that domain in here. I would have best practices that revolve around how standard am I in my project management methods, okay? I would have BPs that ask me things around, am I able to measure my project management? Control and improve. So this kind of gives you a break apart of those 579 best practices you saw and kind of the way it kind of gets broke apart and how it gets assessed in an organization. Anybody here ever done this deep dive or kind of looked at these things in detail? We're going to go one step deeper here in a second, okay? So, let's go and talk about how it drills down into finding out what's really going on in your organization. So if you take project management, we're going to talk about just the project domain. Everybody here's familiar with the PMBOK, right? Big book. There's a page in the PMBOK that has a matrix on there of process, groups, and knowledge areas, right? You're all familiar with that. Well, you get inside that and you pick a place called process, and you talk about develop the project charter as one of the process places in that matrix. So what OPM3 is going to do is it's going to come out here and it's going to say, you know what? Related to developing that project charter, there are 4 best practices that we would address, and they break them into that standardize, measure, control, and improve on the topic of my project charter. So what we did is we just took one of them and we drilled in further, and when I talked about those capability questions that relate to a best practice, this is where you get to in the actual OPM3 assessment. We start asking these questions. It's a capability. Have I developed a project charter process? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But there's evidence. Typically, if a company has a project charter process, have they really defined it? Can you find the evidence for that? Is it real? Sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, we got a project charter process. Oh really? Where is it? I don't know. This is where you get to the meat of what's usually going on in an organization and really finding out how well it's functioning. Go to this next one, and maybe I've done one. Sometimes you might see this, the directors of the PMO or some, group, oh yeah, we got a charter process. All right, but we never told anybody. It's there. We've got the process document, but you go down to the project managers in the trenches and I've never seen that. We just do this. So it's a good way of actually getting to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on in the organization and asking tough questions. Is there proof of communication? Maybe we had a training session. We invited these people. They all came. We know they were there. We know they were trained. It's been communicated. Then we might ask a question that says, well, is there really standard charters being used? Now, I say standard. You might have a standard charter for this project type and a standard charter for this project type. But we've really kind of normalized those, right, in an organization. And do they consistently exist? Do I have evidence? Because it's this looking for this evidence that leads us to understanding where our maturity really is in the way we score and understand these values coming back up through, so we can kind of get an assessment that comes back up and even tells us within what process group or area are we doing well. Does that make sense? It's good stuff. It gets a little intricate, and sure, it's a big list of questions, but most organizations don't digest it all in one sitting by a long shot. They address parts of it and improve their organization. So we look for this evidence because evidence gives us, a validation of maturity. We're doing well here. Maybe we're not doing so well here in this other area, which really kind of points us then to the ability to improve. If we know what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, then we can get better at it. So, evidence of maturity. That evidence that we go and find, and this is where we're going to start to blend back in with Colin talking about using Project Server in support of these best practices. But sometimes, where is that evidence? That in and of itself is a daunting question for some companies, hence the need for a project management information system. Sometimes we find that project management is occurring, but you'd have to go find it on somebody's laptop, might be in their flash drive, might be in the cloud, might be in people's heads. You need a system. You need a place to do it, to enable it. Where are your best practices enabled, I guess, is a really good question to ask. Okay? And so, where do you standardize your artifacts and your processes? Where can you measure? Where can you get control? And where do you improve the process? I think probably most folks here probably have a project information system. But we did this as a means to just say, you know what? There's a way to assess your organization, those best practices, and the tools really help us do it well. And so with that, I'm going to take this and turn this over to Colin, and he's going to talk about just the simple fact of how Project Server enables a lot of these best practices.
Since one of the parts was the management information system, right? And since this is the project conference, this is one of the tools that we think, and we actually have some statistics later that we did some analysis, and we think that it does a pretty good job, actually. And I'm using screenshots here from Project Professional, Project Server, Project Online, and for those who really know the screens, I did compression to make it fit. I only have so much real estate on my PowerPoints here, so, and like in Resource Center, there's some air in the middle of the screen. So I did some compression, but they are actual screenshots from actual server work. So we want to talk about the fact that Project Server is an organizational enabler. It supports those four things: standardize, measure, control, and improve, right? The SMCI. And it also supports like project, program, and portfolio, like we were just talking about. And the technology is where this is manifested, where it shows us how it works. So, like Tim said earlier, having an assessment is great, having the ability, but having a tool, that is how you move it forward, right? And that's how the measure, control, improve. That's where it comes from. So I took one from each. I'll just do the whole slide here. I took one area from each. Like we're going to do one for project management, one for program management, one for portfolio. And I took just one that's not necessarily intuitive. There is one best practice, like Tim was showing a minute ago, for develop project charter, right? So we have one best practice here and I picked the one just for project charter. Do we have a project charter, right? And you might at first think, well, a project charter, that's not really a project thing, right? That's kind of a document. We think of that a lot of times as a Word document or something like that. So we're going to show, this one's a little harder, right? So I wanted to show one that was a little tougher and how it might work in Project Server. So the first place where you can actually get this information for the standardizing the project charter, we can create a PDP, a project detail page, and we can have custom, well, that doesn't show it very good, does it? Custom required and optional fields, right? We can have free entry, we can have drop-down selections, and I know I cut it off, but the point being that we have some of these like benefit, business needs, scope. Those are just big old text boxes. They can type whatever they want. The little red asterisk there on the end, that means it's a required field. So now suddenly we do have a process to standardize. Do we have that developed project charter? Does our organization do that? And we can say yes, and you know what? We can make them all look similar. We can get all the data fields. And just wait a second, I'll show how we can tie that back into a Word document for those who say, yeah, but we have a document, not a bunch of fields. I need a document. Pete and I have worked together before. We've seen people that say, I want my printout. So, but this way, we now have something that we can use, we can report on, we can standardize, and in a minute when we get to improve, the system works as well. Okay? We can make the project charter, we can put it into a workflow. So when whomever it is that produces this, it gets sent out. You notice my status was I initiated it. I started it. Here's the date it occurred. And use the tool. There's other sessions here on workflows. You can make this as complex or as easy as you want, right? Approvals, all the kinds of things that you want for a workflow. You can do that. We can have it then later, as part of our standardization, we can make a link anywhere in Project Center or wherever project when you drill down, and you can have that information sitting right there. And you can set it up where it's emailed. You tie it to a task maybe of a schedule. You tie it to whatever it is, right? So now we've got this as part of I tied my email to my workflow in this case, but you could make it an email. You got the export to Excel buttons. You got all those kind of things, right? So this is just one example, and this is just that first part. Remember, there's 4 parts, SMCI. This is just the standardized part. So what about measuring it? Well, there's the standard report library sitting there, and this is what I said a second ago. Just wait, I'll tie it back. I have an Excel version and a Word version. So I just took the data and I just made a report, and you can stick it back in Excel. Now you've got your document. But I still have the data where I want it, right? I still have the data sitting in Project Server or Project Online or whatever the right term is for you. But now, and this is, again, one of the things I wanted to say, this is all out-of-the-box stuff for Project, right? There's no add-ins, there's no third-party stuff here. This is straight out of the box. So I'm sure there's all kinds of fancy add-ins that you can do to make this even bigger. But the point of this one is you can make this, you can measure it by making it into different formats. You can have customizable, results. If you had a section that said you put in dollars or whatever, maybe you don't want the dollars to go out to everybody, right? You can have a report that only goes to them. There's also reporting services where I made 2 reports. I have a exception report there. Show me any project charter that's missing some fields. Now, not the required fields because they couldn't have hit save, right, because I had a required field. But if there's a field that we think is important, I could just say, hey, how come you guys didn't fill this out? Or I can also have a project charter list. Show me all the project charters. See, so now I can start to compare, and I've actually got that in this next one. I can start to compare my portfolio. Show me all the charters in all the schedules, all the projects, whatever, right? And part of this, sorry, I meant to mention this on the last slide. For that PDP, we can also standardize it, but make it so that it's customizable by size. We talk a lot about, there's a difference between the doghouse and the skyscraper. I don't need a 300-page charter for a doghouse if I'm going to build a doghouse. Now, a skyscraper, maybe I do, right? So there's a difference. You can make the PDP on that last screen. You can standardize it to the right size. So now these reports are also standardized. So you have the right type of report. So that's the S and the M. Here's the C. How do we control this? Well, again, I have my 2 little reports I can look at that we just talked about. I can have my portfolio analysis. I can have the workflow, so I always know where this charter's at. Was it approved? Is it out for editing? Did we send it back? And we can also see in the email system, right? So there's all these control functions that are there. But now, what's the next part? Is the last part of the organizational project management model is that we have improve. So how does this help us improve? And I just picked one example. This was the PDP a second ago, right? On all those fields. And then we come along and we say, but over time we've learned our charter process, we need a new field, we need a new thing. And so we build the newly required charter field. And we just add it. And I made it required. So from this point forward, everybody has to fill out this field now, right? So now this rolls back to standardize. Now I have a new standard field. And in fact, because I made it required, if someone goes back to an old one, they have to put it in now. Okay? So we're using the tool just as it's designed. So that's just an easy one for the project charter. Now I want to go to another one for program resources. Manage. The best practice is named Manage Program Resources. All right? So, and I'm going to do this time, I'm in the program level. Because just like we just did, there's, like Tim was saying, there's the 3 levels, and then there's all the best practices for each one. So, standardizing program resources. That's fairly simple, actually. In Project, we have the Resource Center where we have our names. We can make sure, just even the simple first name, last name. You may recognize where those names come from. And then we have, and I'm not sure why that did it that way, but we tested this a little while ago and we noticed that just got big like that. I'm not sure what happened. But we can have standard fields for our resources. All right? We can have standard loaded rates for our organization. We can have standard calendars. We'll talk more about calendars in a second. We can have all this information sitting there, but that way, again, we're standardizing. We're saying everyone has to have this. And just like before, we can do custom fields. And in this case, I have the field payroll. This was a field we used at one customer that wanted to know the payroll type based on a custom table that we built. Whether it was an employee, a full-time employee, a part-time employee, contractor, temp, etc. So we had this, so this payroll type was a drop-down based on this table, but that helped us standardize, right? If we ever added a new resource, we had to fill out this information. So how do we measure against that? Well, we can have the RBS, the resource breakdown structure. In this case, I know it's usually more hierarchical, but this is more by location. So we can have an RBS built against individuals, so we know. So now we can start having some reporting against them. We can have their skill sets, right? What do they do? And when we get to the improve section here in a second, we'll cover that more. But this talks about, what this is a custom field, but it's kind of standardized in Project. But we're talking about here what their special skills are, and we can tie those to normal people, or we can tie them to generic resources, whichever way, and that's what we're going to show in a second. Or, of course, we can have the view here to measure who's busy, who's not busy. For those who aren't familiar with this view, the black line is the capacity, and all these different colors here are different resources. This is the amount of work assigned to them. This is not a realistic diagram in the fact that none of my resources are over the capacity line. Yeah. So a normal image, really, I should have done the black line like right there, and everyone was over everywhere. But it was a sample, so it looks good. All right. So how do we control? Well, there's all kinds of things, and again, there's so many things in the tool that I just picked one in this case. The team planner's view out of professional, where you can see what's in the red box here. That's the people that are over capacity. All right, so we have a problem there. So right away, I can control just visually that last, some of these you could argue, like this last one, this is one way to control as well. We're measuring and controlling, right? The tool it's not just clear cut when one thing is or another. And there's also I can push this prevent over allocations button, and all kinds of things happen in the system to fix this for me, which you may or may not like, instead of doing it manually, but at least I can control it, right? And then there's the calendars. I can have working time that's different. I have, you can have multiple shifts. You can have people in other countries. You can have all sorts of different work scenarios, 410s, 12s, whatever, but you can control when you're assigning work and based on when they're actually available or when people are off or out of town or on vacation. So I'm going to load this one in its entirety. So how do you improve things? Well, part of the measure and control, when we have those standardizations, I talked about the skill set a minute ago. We can have a skill set for an individual or for a generic resource. In this case, I had a generic resource called design engineer. And so then I look and I have that skill set engineering for this design engineer. Okay, I didn't know who was going to do it. I just had this generic. Well, I decided Angela Martin because I did a filter right here for the skill set of engineering. So I said, okay, who's an engineer? And now I can replace, so I'm improving my situation. I can take Angela and I can replace the design engineer, and now I've got the new name. And so now I can see, as part of this, I can see what Angela's workload is over here, right? So I've got all 4 parts again, the SMCI of program resources. And then I've got that little button again, which again is scary if you're not sure what it's going to do. So that's the project one, and that's the program one. And now I want to talk about the portfolio one. So this one is review and report portfolio. So the best practice is those 3 words. It's not how to review the portfolio. So there's, again, all kinds of sessions here about portfolio and portfolio analysis. So that's one of the things that it's got. We can have, I'm going to load all these at once. We can have, in the standard view here, there's the driver library where we determine what our drivers are for our portfolio. And so, in this case, I've got these drivers here like cost reduction, executive mandate, increased employee morale. I've got this one here. Michael says we should do this project. That's the boss says we should do this project one. So the driver is pretty important because it doesn't matter about profit and the other things like improving employee morale. So, and then we can prioritize. And I've got 2 priorities here. I've got basically two competing groups in this organization right here. I have the IT group, which wants to do it based on how much developer time or how much engineers or whatever it is. And I've got the manufacturing guy. He wants to do projects based on whatever capacity or how many widgets they can make in a month or whatever. So you can have different priorities based on these drivers, and then you come up with this analysis, and we're going to show this a little bit more. But this, again, just standard portfolio part of Project Server. So now I'll do the measure part. So I can have those drivers under the measure. Drilling down again, is I can say, well, for that increasing employee morale, will this have any impact? No, it's actually going to make them much angrier. We'll keep them coming to work. Hey, they might actually recommend, our company to friends and family. We might have a good, happy workforce, right? 2 priorities where I just, grabbed one of those analysis, but I can now measure. I can say, look, we have to do this project because of the government said so. It's not, it doesn't really help our revenue or whatever, but this is the order that we have to do it in. And there's that executive mandate, the boss said so. And then after, this is part of the measure. I don't know how many people have seen this. It doesn't seem as commonly used, but after a portfolio has been selected by the management, the EPM steering team, or whatever it's called in your organization, the project center, you can actually have this view that says, was this committed to or not? Did upper management select this? And when did they select it, right? So I can say, yeah, these ones here, they said we were going to do. Okay? So everyone can see and be, in part of the measuring, we can all see together the same information. Which, you could argue that last screen also goes for controlling, right? But these ones I wanted to show too for controlling is you can say, well, here's our efficient frontier, here's the schedules we should do, and based on this different scenario, which type of an analysis that we did, if we picked it by baseline, we would pick all 6 of our schedules. If we picked it based on this compliance, we'd pick 4. There's all kinds of detail there, but again, this is about how we're controlling, not necessarily how this all works. I did want to show the compare project selection, though. This was what they kind of showed in the keynote yesterday, was how you see some of those selections and stuff. and some things that were forced in, you know. So you can see that as well. So we can control our portfolio. And then this is a better result. One too many. This one shows that force in and force out. We moved the solar power printer up. We forced it in, which moved these two out. All right? And so when we are improving that best practice of review and report portfolio, we can use this tool, and we can say, well, based on this, like if we wanted to modify, we wanted to say, no, let's just see which ones are based on cost. We can run another report. We can go over here. We can look at the scenarios that we saw on those previous screens. Show it by 25 million and compliance by that way. So that's the three, right? That was the three, the project. We did the charter, program, and portfolio. Now, I want to talk for a second here about organizational enablers and how the tool helps with organizational enablers. And I picked the one that Tim already highlighted, knowledge management and project management information system. So in this case, we just have these, we have 4 requirements. The first requirement being, do we actually have a way to do storage, retrieval, dissemination of information? Like Tim was saying, you talk to the executive, do you have a project charter process? Oh yes, absolutely. You talk to the project manager, never heard of it. In fact, I was at a client 2 weeks ago now, and I used one of their documents, one of their business practices, they call them, and it was done in 2009, and it was about issues and risks. And I grabbed it from them because I wanted to get them to use Project Server, which they owned already. I wanted them to use issues and risks with their project sites. So I took their business practice, their best practice, which they had documented 5 years ago or whatever, and said, here, this is how, when you said this here, that's what we call a risk here. And when you said a critical, that's actually called critical right here. And I made, I customized it a little bit, and I showed their management that. And after I was done, a couple of them said, yeah, we got to do it. And then another one, was kind of quiet for a little bit, and he said, I've never seen that best practice before. It's like, but it's your guys' stuff, And I looked at the signatures, and some of the guys were in the room, and they said, no, we've never done it. So, from an OPM perspective, they get 1 point for having a process and 0 for everything else, right? It wasn't disseminated. It wasn't knowledge. They had no way, they had no informational system. And that was part of what I was trying to show them, is because I'd seen floating around here and there a risk document written up, in Word and emailed, right? So this is how the system does it. You can have, even if you just take documents and stick them in the project site, you've got a way at least to do this one right here. So then the second requirement, is it actually defined? What do we need? Right? This is the other part. A lot of organizations have SharePoint, maybe on a project site, and they throw documents there, but no one knows. They don't have versioning. They don't have anything. They don't know what they need, right? So this is kind of the next step. So you have this organizational enabler. Sure, you've got a system, a computer system, SharePoint in this example, but if you don't understand it and have a folder structure and have something going on, then how do you know what to do with it? So the third requirement, is it actually in place? Is it used? Or is it one of those siloed things where only one little department gets to use it because they're the only ones that can handle it? And then, this is the other part, right? And this one, to me, is kind of the most critical. So you get a system, you make rules around the system, but if it's not living and breathing, like that project charter process a minute ago, and now I'm jumping to best practice, but that project charter, if we don't come back and improve upon it and say we have new fields, we have new information, it becomes stale and old and it's no longer relevant. And then people don't use it, right? So it needs to be a breathing, living item. We need to be able to update it. So that's kind of the OEs and best practices. And now we did some analysis internally to say, okay, so OPM3 is this practice, and I was happily surprised to see that most of you knew what it was. And so how do we say, well, okay, this tool project actually does help us. So we sat down and we said, now really, yeah, we're going to the project conference, we want to make this sound good, but really, what does it do? How much does it really do? And so we did a little bit of analysis here, and I want to just explain before I show this next slide. We went line by line through those 2,000 questions, or 1,980, or whatever it is, and we actually went, okay, develop project charter. Can project, whether professional, server, online, can it really do this? And we do have one thing, because the numbers are very fascinating. Some things are setup related. They're not technology, right? It doesn't matter what tool. Like in the example here, like in the develop project charter, there's some questions that aren't technology. No system would do it. Like what do we want in a project charter? Well, you're developing this. It's out of your brain, right? What do we want? If we always want to know the sponsor name. Great. Now we can put that into project. But we didn't say, well, project can help you determine that you need a sponsor name, right? So it's interesting. The project category has a lower percentage because there's a lot of this, like in the human resources one. Well, you hire somebody, the tool doesn't help you. There's hopefully a trained HR person or a trained PMO person or whatever person, management of whatever you're hiring, and they talk to another human and they decide, is this the right fit? That's not project doesn't do that, right? So that's part of what this is. So in the project management part, we determined that about 74% of the organizational enablers and then 69% of the standardized was in there. Like develop project charter. You have to first do the part of figuring out, but once you've figured how that you're actually going to standardize it, and you're going to have that sponsor field, now project can help you totally, right? And then we can do those reports and other things. And yes, sir.
You filtered out the areas where no technology could assist, and the percentages would go up.
Correct.
You're only looking at the technology enabled.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And we debated that, right? But we wanted to be purist from the OPM perspective. But you're right. If you took out the no technology would do, it would get a lot higher. And it's interesting and that's actually part of what the next one here shows, is because it's kind of a roll-up, right? Once you have developed project charter and you have it standardized and measured in the program world, in the project world, project domain, by the time you get to the program domain, you're not creating new. It's kind of that roll-up, right? Because you already have a charter. So now how are you using it at the program level? And it's very interesting, the portfolio level, every question for portfolio is actually in project because of the best practices. Now, of the organizational enablers, there was a few, again, that kind of run in that non-tech, and there's a few things in there that are real specific that, they're not really, again, tech. But this was a fascinating one to us that as the numbers went up, particularly in portfolio, in fact, we kind of double-checked that because that seemed a little good to come to the conference and say, oh, it does everything. But it really does. And so that was an interesting to us how that worked out for us. But, yeah, you're right. You know what? And that's a really good question you had there, or comment. I'd kind of like to see what it does if I redid that. Luckily, I have all that analysis available. Thanks for giving me something to do on the plane ride home. Yeah, and the time to do it. So, just want to cover, we kind of introduced OPM3 and what it would do, and the reason for OPM3 and how you get your organization, figured out, and how you get, that piece. And then part of what we talked about was how Project Server we think is a great fit for that, right? And that's kind of our bent as an organization is we have the project management side and the Project Server side. And there's some other tools, we'll admit, there's some other tools out there, but Project Server, it's in the top quadrant, Gartner quadrant, Magic Quadrant, whatever it's called. So we think it matches the best of all the tools out there. And so now I will take, Tim will too, any questions you have. And there's our contact information if you want to contact us in any way. Would you give, if anyone leaves, give them one of these? So, any questions? Yes, sir.
How are organizations, I'm not that familiar with OPM3, I mean, I got the concept. Do you actually say, gee, I need to get evaluated and a score?
Yes, yes, you do. In fact, Tim has got a potential client right now with that's exactly what they're wanting to do.
If I were an organization that says, gee, getting to level OPM3 whatever is really important for me to get the next government contractor to attract customers, I'm sure you're not there yet, but it would be really interesting to see if organizations who are getting scored were also implementing the tool to help their maturity, how they're scored. I mean, even
Yeah.
showing us how the fit works. I'm just wondering about how it can actually, elevate your OPM3 score. But maybe it's too early for that.
It is a bit early, but no, that's a great one because what you're saying basically is you do an assessment, see where their level of maturity is and what their score is, then implement the tool and how they can use the tool, and then kind of do another assessment and see where they're at. And in some areas, the overused phrase of low-hanging fruit, right? They're going to do the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones. Develop project charter. Let's do that first, right? That's easy. Some of these are kind of hard, right? Some of them in OPM are tougher to do. So, but the tool definitely will increase your trajectory, if nothing else.
I would just say, too, nobody's going to be at 100% across all of those best practices. It just doesn't happen. And different companies have different project needs. Some of them are only doing projects. So they would only really care about that project domain, too. And so...
yeah, that's true. It's by domain as well.
You can kind of slice and dice it kind of the way you want. But it is quantitative. So it kind of gives you a good benchmarking tool to say, hey, we're doing good in this area, but you know what? We're not doing so good here. Let's focus our attention over in this area. And I think that's helpful from an improvement perspective for folks.
You also had a question?
I did the PDP. Where is that? Is that actually in Project Server?
Yes, it is. Pardon me? Yeah, it's the project detail page. Yeah, and yes, it is, and it's there's already the generic 2, I think, come out of the box, where they, in PWA Project Center, top left of the ribbon, you click New, and then it says, I think the 2 are Basic Project Plan,
Enterprise Project.
Enterprise Project Plan. Is that?
Yeah.
There's 2 already, and then they flip you into this PDP in the workflow already. Those are already there. Yeah, and I mean, to make my screenshot longer, I probably added a couple fields, but yeah, that was standard stuff.
And that's Project, not SharePoint.
It's Project Server.
That's in the Project Server or Project Online.
Okay, so
Yeah.
like the metadata and all that you can create.
Correct. Yes, it's in. Oh wait, not in the SharePoint. It's in PWA. That wasn't a SharePoint site. That was in PWA. But yeah, of course, you can always you can extend it into it's invisible now, right? Because you can make that web part. You can expose that in your SharePoint site. So you could see it there, but everything I showed there was inside PWA in Project Center. I clicked New, and then I clicked Mine, for Doghouse or whatever. So I just got the 6 columns. Yeah, you could do it directly in SharePoint.
You can create a form.
Create a form. Yeah, same thing. Mm-hmm. Right.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's how we like to do it as well. PDPs. Yeah, it can get complicated if you want it to, right? It's typical Microsoft stuff, right? It works really great, and then the more you want, the more you do, you can make it. I just was talking to someone yesterday at lunch, and they said that they knew a developer that had spent a year on a workflow. It was the most complex. And to me, that was scary, right? They've been coding for a year to make this, because it did everything. It was basically the whole project, everything, in one workflow, which I thought was crazy because, of course, what if that person gets hit by a bus? No one can refigure that. But it was very complex. Plus, but you're right, you can make it very hard. Yes. Right. And in fact, yeah, that's for the recording. I want to kind of repeat what you just said, that the maturity level of the person creating the workflows or other stuff, the PDPs, directly affects how the organization and their maturity. And we actually are big proponents of, there's 1,000 things, project can do. If your organization can handle 10, let's do 10. And let's have a plan to get to 12, and then a plan to get to 15. And you know what? We may stop at 20. We might get to 500, right? Because I've had the other thing too, where the client says, "Oh, we want." I get this call at least twice a year, a serious call, where they say, "I want portfolio management." I say, "Great. How are you doing project management? How are you recording your resources? How are you?" "Oh, no. I don't need any of that. I just want to do portfolio management." Okay. What are the names of your projects? I don't care. I want portfolio management. I just want to know what we're doing in the big picture. And it's like, okay, that's not a tool problem. That's a maturity problem of you don't understand what you're saying because you have none of the underlying data. So it's definitely a maturity issue. Any other questions? Okay, I'll take the screaming silence. Everyone, we brought some footballs, which we thought was clever, but apparently everyone else here has footballs too. But so I thought, hey, I'll get some footballs. But yeah, that was so. And we do appreciate your time. And if again, email us, contact us, follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.